The long oak table could seat 8, but Henry Thorne set it for 1. He moved through the Montana ranch house with the grim precision of a man who had performed this hollow ritual 1,000 times. 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 glass for water. The china clinked against the wood, the only sound in the vast, suffocating silence. December dusk pressed against the frosted windows, the light failing early as the winter solstice approached. Shadows gathered in the corners where the lamplight couldn't reach. The house was immaculate, floors swept, dishes washed, everything in its ordered place. It was too ordered, too quiet. Henry carved the roasted chicken with slow, deliberate strokes. The blade scraped against bone. He had cooked enough for 3 days, the way he always did. Leftovers meant less cooking, less time spent pretending the act of eating mattered. His hand reached for a second chair, muscle memory from another life, then stopped. His jaw tightened beneath his graying beard. He pulled the hand back and wiped it on his apron. "Just me now," he muttered to the empty room. On the mantel, a framed photograph lay face down. He had turned it that way 5 years ago and never turned it back. Some mornings he forgot it was there. Other mornings it was all he could see, a black hole in the center of the room. The first snow of the heavy storm began to fall. Fat flakes drifted down, catching the lamplight as they passed. The wind rattled the shutters. Christmas was coming, though Henry had done his best to forget the date. He sat at the head of the table, the chair that had been his for 20 years. The chicken steamed on its platter. He bowed his head, lips moving in a silent grace he no longer believed reached anywhere. The house felt too big tonight. 7 empty chairs. 3 empty bedrooms upstairs. A barn with 1 old horse and 2 milk cows. Land stretching in every direction with no one to inherit it. He forced himself to eat, though the food had no taste. Outside, the wind picked up, a low moan turning into a howl. Snow swirled violently against the glass. He didn't hear the footsteps approaching through the storm. He didn't hear them climb the porch steps. 3 sharp knocks shattered the silence. Henry froze. His fork suspended halfway to his mouth. No one came here. Not anymore. The town had learned to leave him alone, just the way he wanted. The knocking came again. Urgent. Desperate. He rose slowly, every instinct screaming to ignore it. Let them go away. Let them find help somewhere else. He had done his time helping people. He had paid his dues in grief. But the knocking came a 3rd time, and something in its rhythm, a frantic, pleading quality, made his feet move. He walked to the heavy oak door and threw the bolt. A woman stood on his porch, swaying in the biting wind. Behind her, 3 children huddled together, seeking warmth that wasn't there. Henry's breath caught. The woman was Chinese, her hair jet black and slick with melting snow, her face gaunt with cheekbones sharp beneath skin drawn too tight. Her thin coat was patched and insufficient for a Montana winter. Her eyes held the desperate brightness of someone who had walked too far on too little hope. The children were worse off. The oldest, a girl of maybe 8, tried to stand straight, shielding the others, but her lips were colorless. A boy, younger, shivered violently. And a tiny girl, no more than 3, clung to her mother's trousers with small, freezing fists. "Please, sir," the woman's voice cracked, her accent thick but her English clear. "My children. They have not eaten in 2 days. I saw your light. I am begging you." Henry's hand tightened on the doorframe until his knuckles went white. Every carefully constructed wall in his chest screamed at him to close the door, to protect the careful emptiness he had built. He knew how the world treated her kind out here, he knew nobody else would open their door. But if he did, he risked cracking the foundation of his own isolation. The littlest girl looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, almond-shaped, and filled with a terror that no child should know. "Please," the woman whispered. "Anything you can spare. We will not trouble you. Just. Please." Henry stepped aside. The words came out rough, unused to kindness. "Come in. Get those young ones warm." The woman stared at him, disbelieving. Her lips trembled. "I mean it," he barked, softer this time. "Before you all freeze to death on my porch." She ushered the children inside. They moved like ghosts, silent and careful, afraid to take up space. Snow melted from their clothes onto his clean floor. The boy's teeth chattered loud enough to hear. The little girl buried her face in her mother's thigh. Henry closed the door, shutting out the howl of the wind. Inside, four strangers stood dripping in his hallway, staring at him with hollow eyes. He had made a mistake. He knew it already. But he couldn't send them back into the storm. "Kitchen," he said gruffly. "This way." They followed him like a string of lost ducklings. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "Thank you, sir." "Hush," Henry said, not unkindly. "Save your breath." His mind raced. The chicken. The bread. He had milk in the icebox, potatoes. He had been planning to eat alone for days. Not anymore. The careful order of his isolation had been breached. Standing in his kitchen, watching 3 starving children huddle together, Henry felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 5 winters. Henry pulled 3 chairs from the storage room, dust rising in small clouds. He hadn't touched these chairs since the day he decided a table for one was all he would ever need. He wiped them down with deliberate care and set them at the table. The wood creaked as he positioned them. The woman helped the littlest girl into a chair, lifting her with a gentleness that spoke of practice. The boy climbed into his seat and stared at the table like it might vanish. The older girl sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, trying to be proper even while shaking with hunger. Henry added more chicken to the platter, sliced thick pieces of bread, and poured milk into cups that had sat empty in the cupboard for 5 years. His hands moved automatically while his mind struggled to catch up. Who were they? Where had they come from? Questions he wouldn't ask. Not yet. He placed the food before them. He looked at their upturned faces, waiting for permission, afraid to presume. The sight struck him like a fist to the gut. "Sit," he said. One word. A command and an invitation. They fell on the food like starving wolves. The woman, whose name he learned was Mai Lin, tried to slow them. "Mind your manners," she whispered, but her own hand shook as she broke bread for the littlest girl, Sue. They ate with the single-minded focus of people who had forgotten what full felt like. Henry sat at the head of the table, put food on his own plate, but couldn't eat. He watched them instead, something twisting in his chest. The boy, Jun, noticed the photograph on the mantel, face down but still visible. "Who is that picture of, Mr.?" Henry's jaw locked. Nobody anymore. Mai Lin's eyes flicked to him, sharp, intelligent, understanding. She touched her son's hand gently. "Hush, June eat." So, the boy was June. The oldest girl was Lian. Names made things real. Names meant connection. Little Sue's eyes drooped. She fought it, mouth still working on a piece of bread, but sleep won. Her head lowered to her arms, and within seconds, she was breathing the deep, even breaths of a child finally safe enough to rest. Mai Lin watched her daughter sleep. Tears gathered in her eyes but didn't fall. She looked at Henry across the table. "We will leave at first light," she said quietly. "I swear it. We won't impose on your kindness past tonight." Henry looked at the sleeping child, at the boy still eating like the food might disappear, at the older girl who had finally relaxed enough to slump in her chair. Something shifted behind his eyes, a decision he didn't want to examine too closely. "Storm's getting worse," he said, his voice gravelly. "You'll stay the night." He knew, God help him, that he wouldn't sleep tonight. Because somewhere between opening the door and watching them eat, he had let them in. Not just into his house, but into the carefully guarded emptiness he had been protecting. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight, ushering in Christmas Day. And at Henry Thorne's table, for the first time in half a decade, more than one chair was filled. Henry woke to a sound he thought he would never hear again. Children's laughter. He lay in bed, disoriented. For one brief, cruel moment, he thought it was William. He thought 5 years had been a nightmare and he would wake to find his family still alive. Then reality crashed back. He sat up, heart pounding. The laughter came from downstairs, high and clear. Henry dressed quickly, confused and territorial. This was his house. He had given them shelter for the night, but that didn't mean they could take over. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My Lin stood at his stove, making coffee. She had found the pot, the grounds, done it all without asking. Leanne was setting the table. Jun sat on the floor near the fireplace, playing with something. Henry's wooden horse. The one William had carried everywhere. The one Henry had finally put on the mantel because seeing it was too painful, but throwing it away was impossible. Was this yours? Jun looked up at him, holding the carved toy with careful hands. Henry's throat went dry. It was my son's. The words came out rougher than he intended. Jun's face fell. He started to put the toy back. I am sorry. William, Henry heard himself say. His name was William. He was 6 when he couldn't finish. Didn't need to. My Lin turned from the stove, understanding written in every line of her face. I am sorry, she said simply. We didn't mean to intrude on your things. Jun, put that back. No, Henry surprised himself. It's fine. It's just a toy. Should be played with. Jun's face lit up. He made the horse gallop across the floor. It was a normal sound, alive, everything this house hadn't been for years. Henry moved to the window. Outside, white erased the world. The storm had intensified overnight into a full blizzard. The wind howled like wolves. Can't travel in this, he said curtly. You'll stay till it clears. My Lin's shoulders tensed. Sir, we don't want to. Ain't sending nobody into that, Henry cut her off. Storm like this can kill. You'll stay. That's final. He made his tone hard, unarguable. Inside, something else entirely was happening. Relief. Dread. A dangerous warmth spreading through his chest. Leanne appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee. Mama made it, she said quietly. I hope that is all right. Henry took the cup. It's all right. Leanne smiled, small, tentative, and went back to help her mother. Henry watched her move. Competent, careful, too old for 8 years. Your husband, he said gruffly. What happened? Leanne glanced at her mother, who nodded. Permission. Railroad accident, My Lin answered, not turning from the stove. 2 months ago. He was a good man. Worked hard. After he passed, the landlord took our cabin. Said he didn't want our kind there if there wasn't a man to work. She shrugged, a gesture of resignation that broke Henry's heart. We have been heading west, looking for work in the laundry houses. No family here. Just us. But we are enough, Leanne said, her chin lifting. Pride even in poverty. Henry turned back to the window. Snow piled against the glass. Might be days before this clears, he said. We will work, My Lin said softly. I can cook, clean, mend. The children can help with animals. We will earn our keep. Just stay warm, Henry mumbled, retreating to his study. That evening, My Lin found his mending pile, shirts he had been meaning to repair for months, and sat sewing by the fire. Her hands were quick and skilled. You don't have to do that, Henry said. I know My Lin didn't look up. But I cannot sit idle. It is not in my nature. Henry watched her work. He noticed things he hadn't the night before. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The small smile when Sue said something funny. the way her shoulders relaxed when all 3 children were in her sight. She was beautiful, he realized, underneath the exhaustion. There was steel in her spine. You lost them all at once, My Lin said quietly, breaking the silence. Didn't you? Henry's hands curled into fists on the arms of his chair. How'd you know? The way you look at my children. Like they are ghosts. She finally turned to face him. And you are afraid it will happen again. Henry couldn't speak. Couldn't confirm or deny. His silence was answer enough. My Lin's expression softened. I won't offer you empty words. I know how useless those are. I just want you to know that letting us stay. It matters. More than you know. Henry nodded once, curtly, and stood to leave. Henry, she said. She had used his Christian name. Thank you. He walked away before the burning in his eyes became tears. That night, after the children were asleep in beds Henry had made up with clean sheets, he sat alone in the dark. He took the photograph of Elizabeth, William, and little Rose from the mantel. Hands shaking, he turned it over. 3 faces smiled at him. Forever young, forever gone. I'm sorry, he whispered to them. I don't mean to forget you. But downstairs, 3 living children slept. A woman who understood loss sat by the dying fire. And the house, God help him, felt alive again. Christmas morning broke clear and brutally cold. Henry woke to silence. No laughter. No footsteps. He dressed quickly, dread pooling in his stomach. He knew before he reached the kitchen what he would find. My Lin was packing their few possessions into a worn carpet bag. The children sat at the table, dressed in their threadbare coats. Sue clutched a rag doll. Jun stared at his hands. Lian's face was carefully blank, but her eyes were red. Storms cleared, My Lin said without looking at him. We should move on while the weather holds. Henry's chest tightened. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? What he had been preparing for. They would leave. His house would be quiet again. Safe. Empty. You don't have to go, he heard himself say. My Lin's hand stilled on the buckle of the bag. Yes, we do. We cannot impose forever. The roads ain't clear yet. Snow's deep. You won't make it far. We will manage. We always do. Her voice was steady, but her hand shook. You have been more than kind, Mr. Thorne. But we belong on the road. Henry wanted to argue. He wanted to say they didn't impose. That the house felt right with them in it. That he had slept better the past 2 nights than he had in 5 years. But the word stuck in his throat. Because letting them stay meant risk. It meant attachment. It meant caring about people who could be taken away. I'll give you money, he said gruffly. For the road. To get you settled. My Lin's spine straightened. We do not need charity. It ain't charity. It is. She finally looked at him, eyes fierce. We needed kindness. You gave us that. It is enough. Jun suddenly wrapped his arms around Henry's leg, holding on tight. I don't want to go. Jun! My Lin's voice cracked. Let go. Now. But why? Why can't we stay? Mr. Henry has room. He's all alone. That is enough. My Lin pulled him away gently but firmly. We do not belong here. Little Sue looked up at Henry. Why can't we stay with Mr. Henry? The question hit him like a physical blow. Henry opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer that wouldn't sound like cruelty or cowardice. He said nothing. My Lin lifted Sue into her arms and took Jun's hand. Lian followed with the carpet bag. They stood in a small cluster near the door. Thank you, My Lin said quietly. For everything. The children and I, we won't forget you. Henry's hands gripped the door frame. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to speak, to ask them to stay, to choose life over death. But he said nothing. They walked out into the cold. The door closed behind them. Through the window, Henry watched for small figures trudge toward the road, growing smaller with each step against the blinding white snow. The house fell silent. For chairs sat pushed in at the table. Children's fingerprints marked the window glass where Jun had pressed his face to watch the snow. Henry stood frozen. His heart hammered against his ribs. On the table sat a small piece of paper. Leanne's drawing. 5 stick figures holding hands. A house. A sun. Words in careful, practiced letters, "Thank you for being our family." Henry picked it up with shaking hands. He crumpled it, strode to the fireplace, and threw it in. Then, with a strangled cry, he lunged forward, pulling it from the flames before it could catch. The edges were singed and smoking. He smoothed it frantically against his chest. "What have I done?" The house echoed around him. Empty. Safe. Dead. Henry Thorne sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. He had sent them away. He had protected himself. He had chosen the familiar grief over the terrifying possibility of joy. And it felt like dying all over again. He looked at the mantel. At the photograph of Elizabeth. He picked it up. "What do I do?" Henry asked the photograph. No answer came. But in the silence, he remembered Elizabeth's last words to him. "Don't die with us, Henry. Promise me." He had promised. And he had broken that promise every single day since. He had locked himself in this house, locked his heart in ice. Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted this. She would have told him to find joy again. To live. Henry set the photograph down. He looked at Leanne's drawing again. 5 stick figures. They weren't a replacement for what he had lost. Nothing could replace Elizabeth, William, and Rose. But they didn't have to be replacements. They could just be themselves. A family that needed a home. Henry moved suddenly, decisively. He grabbed his heavy coat, his hat, and strode to the barn. He saddled his horse with quick, sure movements. He had spent 5 years choosing death. Not anymore. Henry Thorne rode out into the frozen Christmas morning, searching. 3 miles from his house, he saw smoke rising from an abandoned line shack near the creek. His pulse jumped. He approached quietly. Through the broken window, he saw 4 huddled figures. My Lin was trying to coax a fire from damp wood. The children were pressed together, shivering. Henry dismounted. He walked to the door and knocked. Gentle. Respectful. My Lin looked up, startled. Fear washed over her face, followed by confusion. Henry cleared his throat. "I got something to say. And I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before you run me off." My Lin stood slowly. The children watched with wide eyes. "I got a house too big for one man," Henry said, his voice shaking in the cold air. "Land that needs working. Animals that need tending. And I got a table with 4 empty chairs." He had to pause to breathe. "I'm asking if you'd consider filling them." My Lin stared at him. The wind whistled through the gaps in the shack's walls. "We are not charity," she said carefully. "I won't be a replacement for what you lost." "I know that," Henry said. "You ain't replacements. You're life. And I've been dead long enough." My Lin's eye searched his face, looking for truth. "Why now? Why not this morning?" "Because I was afraid," Henry admitted. "Still am, if I'm honest. Losing my family near killed me. Thought if I never let nobody close again, I'd never hurt like that again." He looked at the children. "Turns out the hurting never stopped. I just got used to it." Leanne stepped forward. "Would we be a family? A real one?" Henry lowered himself to one knee, meeting her eyes. He saw the future there. Yes. If you'll have a broken-down old rancher who don't smile much, but who will do his best by you. I promise. Jun rushed forward. Can I call you Pa? The word hit Henry hard, but this time it didn't hurt. It healed. Tears burned his eyes, and he didn't hide them. I'd be honored, son. Little Sue toddled over and wrapped her arms around his neck. We go home now. Henry laughed, a rusty, broken sound that felt like prayer. He looked at Mai Lin over Sue's head. Reckon that settles it. Mai Lin's lips trembled. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Henry Thorne, are you sure? Truly sure. I'm sure, Henry said, standing with Sue in his arms. I'm scared, but I'm sure. They rode back through the snow. 5 people on 2 horses. Mai Lin sat behind Henry, arms around his waist. Thank you, she whispered against his back. For coming after us. Thank you, Henry replied, for knocking on my door. The ranch house came into view. Windows dark, but waiting. Henry's heart felt warm. They were going home. Later that afternoon, the house was transformed. The smell of roasting turkey, a second chance at a Christmas meal, filled the air. Henry stood by the mantel. He took Elizabeth's photograph and placed it upright, visible, honored. Mai Lin saw and understood. They are part of this too, she said softly. Always will be, Henry agreed. They'd want this. Want me to live. They gathered around the table. 5 chairs filled. Henry looked at each face. Mai Lin at the far end. Lian and Jun on one side. Sue next to him. I'd like to say the blessing, Henry said. They joined hands. Sue's small fingers squeezed his. Jun's grip was tight. Mai Lin's hand was warm and sure. Henry bowed his head. Lord, I'm thankful for second chances. For folks brave enough to knock on doors. For children who remind old men what matters. For family, however it comes. For the ones we've lost, and the ones we've found. Amen, they echoed. The meal was loud and joyful. Sue spilled her milk. Jun asked a dozen questions. Mai Lin caught Henry's eye across the table and smiled. He smiled back. Outside, the snow fell gently, covering the hard, frozen ground with something new. Inside, the fire crackled. The table built for 8, now seating 5, was full. Not perfectly full. Not the way it had been before. But beautifully full. Henry Thorne looked at his family, scattered around the room. And for the first time in 5 years, he looked forward to tomorrow.